Sure. Oh, thank you. All right. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Oh, thank you so much for being here. I know I'm up against Ian, who's upstairs, but do remember that it takes 40 of his little mammals to balance out one of my large ones. So you've made the right choice, obviously. So, oh, that's me, in case you can't see. I know I'm really short, and this room is pretty long, so. It was back in 2003. I was working on this whale research vessel, and we were actually tracking sperm whales acoustically. So we were dropping these underwater microphones into the water that we call hydrophones. And then we would track the whales, and as soon as we caught up with them, we'd take these tiny biopsy samples that could tell us all these things about the toxicology of the environment they were living in. At the same time, we always had someone up on deck looking out for signs of life. So on this particular day of interest and of significance, I would say, I happened to be the person up on deck. It was an incredibly beautiful, flat, calm day. Not a ripple on the surface, not a drop of wind, stinking hot. But I was out there because I was looking for these sperm whales that we'd been tracking all through the night. I could hear their calls emanating through the pilot house floor from below, but I just couldn't see them. I knew what I was looking for because I'd been tracking sperm whales for a little while by this point. This low, bushy blow slanted off onto the left-hand side, which is super characteristic of a sperm whale, sorry. So I did know what I was looking for, but I just couldn't see them. I looked and I stared into the sun and I searched, and that's when I saw this. A tall, vertical, powerful blow. It was so big, it looked like it rose all the way to the sky. And honestly, at that point, I knew that it could only have been produced by an animal that was gigantic. So I got really excited, and I grabbed the walkie-talkie that was wrapped on the railing in front of me, and I called down to my captain, and I said, Bob, we must go. 11 o'clock, 2 kilometers. And he says, why? And I say, I think it's a blue whale. So he says, sure, and then he turns the boat, goes off track, starts charging the direction that I sent him off in. And I'm now panicking because I'm thinking, I can't afford to lose sight of this animal. So I'm staring, I'm paranoid, I'm trying to focus really hard. I'm looking into the sun, there's tears streaming down my cheeks. And that's when I start to think I'm actually losing my mind. Because it wasn't just one blue whale I was seeing, but there were 6 blue whales in an area the size of a soccer pitch. So I am standing there thinking, why on earth would an animal, the largest that's ever roamed the planet, growing to the length of a basketball court, choose to aggregate in this tiny spot in a warm tropical ocean when it can roam 70% of our planet? But I was fresh out of undergrad, so I knew I had the answers. I reflected, and I remembered. My textbooks and my professors all told me that large whales, like blue whales, undertake long-range migrations between cold feeding areas and warm breeding and calving areas. Sri Lanka is 5 degrees above the equator. It's as warm and as tropical as you can get. So at this point, I was really stoked, because I was going to be the first person in the world to ever record blue whales having sex. And you would have been as excited as me, I promise. So of course at this point I'm like, okay Bob, this is going to be amazing. We just have to get there really fast. And so we're cruising and we're moving closer and closer and closer, and we're getting there, and like finally we are there, and you know what? It's not at all what you expect it to be. There's not a single whale penis in sight. There are no babies. And these whales are just kind of like hanging out. They're lolling at the surface. Some of them dive, they come back up. The dreams I'd created for myself over the last 2 kilometers of my life are now shattered. I'm thinking, what am I going to do with my life? Obviously, because this was going to be, obviously, my moment. So sheepishly, I go up to Captain Bob, and I'm like, hey, Bob, do you think that maybe we can hang around a little longer? And he says, yeah, sure, okay. I guess I've taken him completely off track anyways, so. And I'm sure glad I did, because that's when I saw this. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a pile of blue whale poop. It's not just amazing because of its stunning red color. And of course, here's when I put out my challenge. I say, if you ever come across a more beautiful looking poop, please email me. But what's most incredible about this sighting is that when I saw this, I knew that these animals were feeding somewhere close. But remember what I told you. Blue whales go to cold feeding areas and just breed and calve in warm places. And Sri Lanka is in the tropics. So these whales had figured out how to actually feed in warm waters. This was my eureka moment. Not everyone can say their career started with a pile of shit. But mine did. And I'm super excited about that. But literally, this was the moment that spiraled into me pioneering blue whale research in the entire northern Indian Ocean. And I've been on this incredible adventure ever since. I've basically gone on to name these whales the unorthodox whales because they break the stereotypes that we'd built for them. They're doing something different. They actually are non-migratory. They're the only population of non-migratory blue whales in the world. They remain in warm tropical waters throughout their lives, which is incredible. And they actually can do this because these waters in Sri Lanka are more productive than you would expect for that latitude because of the unique position of Sri Lanka in this enclosed ocean basin that has this amazing, unusual monsoonal climate. They have a different acoustic dialect. If I took one of these blue whales and I dropped them in the ocean off here in California, the blue whales wouldn't be able to speak to each other. They're actually the smallest of all the blue whales in our oceans. To be fair, they're a population of pygmy blue whales because they grow up to 80 feet and not 100 feet. And they also have different behavioral adaptations. The ones in Sri Lanka, they lift their tail flukes up before a deep dive more often than anywhere else in the world. So it's a complete photographer's dream. And all over the world, we call blue whales stenophagous. That means they specialize to feed on only one kind of prey, which is krill. But these blue whales, they feed on something different. And while I can proudly say that no country within the northern Indian Ocean has ever engaged in hunting for whales or whaling, in the 60s, there was illegal Soviet whaling that took out 1,294 of these individuals from this small patch of ocean. That's about the same number of people we're hoping will attend this expo today, right? But as many of you know, whaling is now almost an obsolete problem for whales. It's not the biggest problem that they face. There are tons of others out there. And in the case of the blue whales from Sri Lanka, the biggest problem is ship strike. So let's have a look at a map of global shipping pathways. I know, it's crazy, there's lots of lines. But don't panic. Just look at the yellow lines. Because the yellow lines are where you'll find the busiest shipping lanes in all of the world. And then if we zoom into the small area around Sri Lanka, the northern Indian Ocean, what you'll notice is that the south coast of Sri Lanka is actually home to one of the busiest shipping lanes in the entire world. Everything from Singapore to Dubai travels through these areas. So that's two of the biggest ports in the world. And while ship traffic has doubled globally, it has actually quadrupled in this part of the ocean, showing how trade is changing, and the fact that actually traffic is just going to keep increasing. If we zoom in close and look at some of the data that I've been actually collecting over the years, the red lines are actually real ship movement data. So the redder it is, the more popular that route. And the black dots are sightings of blue whales that we have collected through our research. What will become immediately obvious when you look on the south coast is that there is distinct overlap between where we're seeing whales and where we're seeing ships. So sites like this are not surprising. This is a blue whale that came wrapped on the bow of a container ship into the main port in Colombo, Sri Lanka. We know it died on impact because it was a fresh carcass showing signs of internal hemorrhaging. 12 days later, we found another carcass floating at sea with a gigantic propeller gash. The thing is, evidence like this is not always available because quite often these carcasses will sink or will get pushed offshore, or if they do wash up onto shore, they are so deteriorated because of our warm tropical climate that it's hard to identify the cause of death. But we do know these are not isolated incidences because research of this very coastline here in California, where you experience the exact same problem, researchers have shown that for every whale that we document, at least 10 others go undocumented. So it's a problem. It's a big problem. But in my eyes, it's actually a resolvable problem, because if we can separate where we see the whales and where we see the ships, we can come up with some way to mitigate the issue. And this has become my crusade. So the whole thing here is that, the main thing, I guess, is that we have to understand that ship strike is all of our fault. We're all to blame because 90% of everything is shipped. But that doesn't mean we just have to be part of the problem. We can be part of the solution. And using science, we've been able to show that, in fact, 90% of the vessels that use this shipping pathway are actually not coming into the local ports in Sri Lanka. They're bypassing the country. So if we shift shipping lanes 15 nautical miles offshore, we're actually separating where we're seeing the whales and the ships, which is a great thing. But we're also having a positive impact on the whale watching industry that uses these nearshore waters. We're increasing safety to the fishing fleets. And we're also allowing Sri Lanka to uphold some of the international agreements that we've been signatory to. And in this case, it's about reducing coastal pollution based out of ships. And then the other 10% that have to come in through nearshore waters because they're coming into our ports, well, if we can ask them to slow down over designated parts of our ocean where we know the whales are feeding or spending time, then we can have a significant positive impact. Because science has shown that below certain speeds, impact is not lethal. And that whale that was wrapped on the container ship, the issue there was that that ship was traveling at speeds far exceeding those speeds that can allow an animal to survive if it's hit. So that's what went wrong there. So now many of you might be wondering, why should we care? Or why do I care so much to dedicate my entire life to trying to figure out how to solve this problem and protect these whales? Well, many people think it's because these animals are charismatic and beautiful. And they are. They're definitely charismatic and beautiful. And then there's that thing, right, that incredible privilege that we have to live on a planet side by side with the biggest animal that has ever roamed. I think that's amazing. But if that's the only reason we're going to protect these whales, then we're doing them a complete disservice. Because whales are ecosystem engineers. Essentially, their existence in the environment allows the ecosystem to function properly. And they actually provide services to us, human society. So let me tell you a little bit about how saving whales is so important to the resiliency of the oceans. Whales dive to the depths to feed, and as they do so, they feed in areas where there are these nutrients that are completely missing from surface waters. So they feed in areas where there's iron and nitrogen, and then they come up to the surface to breathe, and they release these giant fecal plumes. These fecal plumes are full of nutrients. They're the ocean fertilizer. And they come up to the surface, and as it's released, they fertilize these tiny microscopic plants called phytoplankton that are the base of every single food chain in the ocean. So more phytoplankton means more of everything else. More fish, more krill, you name it. And then on top of that, phytoplankton, they eat sunshine for breakfast, peppered with this fertilizer, and they release oxygen into the environment. Do you know that every second breath you take comes courtesy of these little plants in the ocean? Gotta thank the ocean and perhaps even the poop. But besides the poop, whales are also really important in their death because their carcasses are the largest form of detritus to sink from the ocean surface all the way to the bottom of the ocean. They provide food to about 400 different species, including this really gross slimy hagfish. And then, as these carcasses are sinking to the depths, they also take out excess carbon from the atmosphere down into the depths of the ocean. So scientists have calculated that whale fall annually will take out the equivalent of 190,000 tons of carbon, which is the same amount that's produced by 80,000 cars per year from the atmosphere down to the depths of the ocean. The deep ocean is what we call a carbon sink. Carbon sinks trap excess carbon, carbon sinks trap excess carbon from the atmosphere, therefore helping to delay the impacts of global warming. So these creatures do play a really important role in our lives. And now I'm sure all of you agree we need to save these animals, right? Right, good. But then there are also personal reasons why we get so passionate and so engaged with these creatures, and then we throw ourselves for the rest of our lives to try to figure out what we can do to protect them. In my work, quite a lot of the time, I use a very simple but very powerful technique called photo identification. Photo identification simply involves taking photographs of particular parts of an animal's body and looking for characteristic markings that can help us to identify and re-identify the individuals over and over again. So we can do things like estimate population size or figure out how old animals are. For blue whales, we take pictures of their tail flukes and the dorsal sides. And in 2011, I happened to be on a documentary shoot off the east coast of the country, and I took this picture. As soon as I saw it, I thought, I've seen this animal before. Luckily for me, before I started this research, there'd only been one paper ever published on the blue whales in Sri Lanka, and that was from the early 80s. So I went back to that one paper, and there were a few photographs of whales, and I found that. So that's a picture taken in 1984, and that's a picture taken in 2011, 27 years later. So we know that this whale is at least 27 years old, and because of the heart-shaped marking, I've named him Valentine. And what's even cooler is the fact that where I saw this whale in 2011, which is the triangle, was just less than 10 kilometers away from where it was originally seen in 1984. So I can't tell you what this animal was doing in the intervening years. It could have packed its bags and gone on a gigantic holiday, or it could have hung around all that time. But that's why it's so important for people like myself to be on the ocean as much as possible, collecting this data, because it really allows us to try to hone how we invest ourselves and make sure that our conservation strategies are based on great science and a lot of good information. So you definitely think this work should go on, right? Oh, yeah. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, I come from Sri Lanka, beautiful tropical island. But the thing is, Sri Lanka has been identified as a priority area for marine conservation because it's an area of high species diversity, but also high impact. Unfortunately, less than 1% of our oceans have actually been protected, and it's listed as one of the 40 worst funded countries for conservation. So the generosity of people like yourself is exactly what keeps this work going. And at the end of a 30-year war, Sri Lanka is now going through this phase of unprecedented and unsustainable development in the name of economic growth. And we're not really paying much attention to our natural capital. When it comes to the marine environment, we really struggle to face the challenges we meet because of a lack of awareness about the oceans, but also a lack of capacity in the field of marine conservation. When I started my career, which is not a long time ago, I want everyone to know that, and I told people I want to be a marine biologist, everyone was like, what are you going to do with that? I mean, it makes no sense at all. It's a beautiful tropical island with jurisdiction over 8 times more ocean area than land area. But traditionally, our culture looked at the ocean as a place of extraction and not of protection. And suddenly here I am saying, I want to save the ocean. And nobody could really get it. And that's actually helped me in some ways, because now, through my work, I've created a marine conservation movement in Sri Lanka, and more people than ever before want to go into this field and protect our oceans. But we do lack opportunity, And that's why I established Oceanswell. Oceanswell is the first marine conservation research and education organization in Sri Lanka. And through it, I want to make sure that I'm able to scale up and provide opportunities to this growing need in the region. Because I really believe in homegrown talent to address local issues, because that's what creates sustainability and allows us to achieve those conservation objectives. 70% of our planet is ocean, yet there's a disproportionate number of us working for it. 70% of our coastlines are in the developing world, but representation at the global stage is next to non-existent. If we really want to save our oceans, if we really want to make a difference, we need custodians on every single coastline who can empower, engage, and enable their people to care and change. And Oceanswell is all about nurturing those future ocean heroes, about providing opportunities to those students in underrepresented nations to conduct marine research, marine conservation research particularly, and also engaging everybody in the stories and conversations about the magic of the world's oceans. So to that end, there's plenty of opportunity for all of you to get involved. We are constantly, running education programs. We look for support for staying on the water. Boat days are expensive. We need equipment. We're trying to build a field center. And then on the other side, when I look at this room, I see all this incredible talent and skill. And we're always looking for people who can help us to build platforms that can host our education programs or build the games that we know are going to help to change the way people engage with the oceans. That's exactly what Oceanswell does. It's about creating inclusivity and diversity in the field of marine conservation, and it's about changing the people's attitudes and how they engage with the oceans. So, trust me, no donation is too big or too small, no skill is wasted. Please, I'm just outside here. Come to my table, have a chat. Let's explore how you can get involved. And blue whales, they are our flagship species. We can all come together to protect these animals and their homes. Thank you.